Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm delighted and privileged to be here with Joe Stanhope, who's the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. Joe's a leading expert on marketing and the intersection of marketing and technology. I've had the privilege to talk with Joe quite a few times in my experience here at Amperity. Joe covers customer data platforms, also called CDPs, really enterprise marketing software suites, all the customer analytics work, cross-training campaign management, identity management, and spends tons of time with customers and brands exploring these kinds of solutions. Joe, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Great to be here. Great to be with you and great to talk about these exciting topics.
Fantastic. So one of the things that we're seeing and hearing in the industry is this real importance for the marketer and the brand of understanding the customer journey. And when I say journey, that means lots of things, but this life cycle journey from the first time someone might become aware of a brand, all the way through engagement, awareness, that first purchase, repeat purchase, and then into loyalty. And at each point in this life cycle, brands need different kinds of information to make the right kinds of decisions. How you treat a visitor or someone you're first prospecting with is different than how you treat somebody who's expressed interest but maybe hasn't transacted. And that's very different than someone who's signed up for your loyalty program as a repeat customer you have lots of experience with. And customers increasingly, as they engage with brands, are expecting that kind of curated journey experience throughout that. And so we really think, and as we're hearing from businesses, that businesses are looking at managing this global life cycle, and how they manage it is going to have a disproportionate impact on their business. And so one of the things that I'd love to do a little bit, Joe, is work with you and step back, and let's just think about the last several years, all the changes that we've been through in the industry. And what have you seen different from these brands? How have they been considering, let's call it first party data, as part of the data that they use at each one of these stages? How have their decisioning and requirements changed? And then how do they think about a customer data platform if they do in that context?
Yeah, I really agree with everything you said there about that data has become an important area of interest as a supporting factor or enabler, as it were, for the broader customer life cycle, or trying to engage and create relevance and create great experiences consistently in the right ways across that. We hear that a lot. We actively listen for it. So I agree 100%. A lot of interest in the underlying factors that support that. And then that points a lot of brands towards interest in data, but also the applications of that data, which is what you were getting to. If you need different kinds of data at different points, at different levels of resolution, at different phases, right, in that customer life cycle to support consistent engagement. And a lot of companies now are backing up and really rethinking, revamping how they understand customers and where and how they target for interactions, or especially having a lot of interest in how do you get the right data in place and systems in place to engage across this ever-growing range of channels and touch points. Now, what's interesting, I think, is that a lot of organizations already have a fair amount of technology in place, ostensibly to do many of these things, and so support customer engagement. And yet so many of them seem to struggle with working through this sort of process, right, to redevelop into a broad customer journey approach. Even though some of the technologies you could even say are fairly commoditized and relatively straightforward at this stage. I think the downstream impact of all of this, and where a lot of the differentiation occurs and can be found, is in the data. It is, in a literal metaphorical sense, that the fuel in the engine. And the ability to execute that strategy basically lives and dies on the data foundation. So what we find when we talk to a lot of our clients is that it's not that the data doesn't physically exist, but it's raw data, or it's dispersed across so many different source systems. So the data is there, but they can't quite reach out and grab it. And it's very, very frustrating and very, very challenging. And so this is really about getting access to data, getting into position to support decisioning and execution. And a lot of companies come to this realization fairly quickly when they're thinking about these kind of customer journey approaches to expand their customer engagement. And it justifies the need for innovation, and they think about it sometimes from different perspectives. And that's not right or wrong by any means, but a lot of them find, in a sense, a sort of a burning platform moment, that kind of a challenge, right, that bubbles up to the top initially and drives this realization of like peeling back the onion, that it's not the technology, it's the data that powers all of this, right? And it creates that opportunity and way of thinking about it in a data-oriented sense. And because some of them will say, hey, we want better measurement initially, or we want to tie together this wide range of customer journey experiences, or we want to bring in a broader set of customer experience capabilities. We want marketing and commerce, the contact center, to be on the same page. You know, there's the one I hear the most is personalization, which is a broad term, but I do actively listen for it, where they just want to create better experiences out of the gate for customers that are just more relevant, more timely, in the right place, the right channel at the right time. And overall, I think it's positive. I think agree with you that data is a powerful enabler here. The broader best practice, though, where we see is a lot of companies double down on the data or the technology and trying to think through those details, as they should. But what they really need to start with is rethinking that strategy very thoroughly. If you want to have that kind of engagement and cohesion across the customer journey, you need to start from a strategic standpoint, right? To really reimagine what customer engagement looks like in that kind of environment, because that's what really gets you to how do you want to engage, and what data and systems are necessary to actually deliver on that, so they can pursue the right data strategy, the right technology approaches that will actually power the strategy, the engagement that they actually want to deploy.
That's super interesting. I'd love to just come back a little bit, because it reflects my experience. You know, sometimes what we would observe is customers are running the right campaign with the right tool, they just have the wrong data. And so that causes a little bit of a disconnect. And so it sounds like what you're saying is that if I'm listening, it's a couple things. One, understand whether your problem's your tool or your data. And your point, it's resonant. The data exists to serve the tool that then serves the customer. Two, that there's some real economics in getting the data right, related to the tools. And then three, what I'm hearing from you is all of that has to start with a strategy. What are you trying to accomplish with this combination of tools and data? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, that's the way I think about it, in terms of, look, there's such a world of possibilities out there, right? And there are, look, you can be very academic about it and say, we want to do all the engagement everywhere all the time, right? But what's right for one brand's business is going to be different for another's, right? And you need to understand, you know, within the realm, the context of your own resources, your own corporate strategy, your own industry, what do you want to understand about customers? How do you want to engage with them now and in the future? And be developing the systems that enables that, what's right for your customer and for your organization. It can't be a fishing expedition. That's what I really try to get buyers and marketing organizations to understand is it's not reasonable to think you're going to have all the data available all the time in every system. It's a great, cool sounding idea, but you really have to be focused, right? Because time is of the essence. There is a great opportunity to do this great work right now where we are in the marketplace, right? And in where these industries are. And so working quickly, getting access to just the right data, no more, no less, it's just a powerful enabler if you can have the right kind of focus.
That's so helpful. The other thing, you know, one thing I have that's just riffing in my head right now as you're talking is this notion of a whiteboard where there's different stages, and the starting point for the brand is just at every stage, what are the top questions I want to be able to ask about the customer at this stage? What are the top actions that might be ones that they could take? And how do I get that as small as possible and just start there? Because then I can always ask more questions and take more actions. But if I try to ask all the questions and take all the actions at every step, it quickly becomes overwhelming. Is that making sense?
All of this is basically a prioritization exercise, and even at the end of the day, it's change management. Again, you know, marketers are being forced to retool an airplane while it's in flight, right? They still have a day job while they're trying to innovate all these new capabilities, and they still have responsibilities to the business as well as to their customers. So you can't do everything all the time. You can't just flip a switch, right, and make everything come to life. So there's quite a, I believe, almost an analytical exercise involved in what are the most impactful ways that we can make incremental adjustments over time to the way we engage with customers, right? And developing effectively a roadmap for how you're going to play that out over time. I think it's really a practical way to think about it too, because as you have success incrementally, you're proven back to the organization that the marketing and data work is showing value to the business. I mean, there's a key to this, that this doesn't happen in a bubble, that you also want to be able to tie these capabilities back to some kind of business measurement or KPI, right? You're ultimately driving the business forward, which increasingly marketers are responsible for, right? This isn't something that lives only within the walls of marketing now. So if you're making these changes in a highly dynamic environment, you want to make incremental updates over time, be agile, and be able to measure what you're doing and make that continuous business case, right? Where what we're doing with the data, with the tech, with these improvements is driving our business ahead.
Super. Thanks so much. I have this image in my head now of not just this whiteboarded map, but also this flywheel of sort of starting with something and then measuring all the time. And I also have in my head really writing down what's critical to me to run the business, because I am struggling. I have a business to run that has to continue to perform. And I'm trying to make change to those business operations in a way that does more but doesn't penalize the thing that's keeping the business functioning. It's a really interesting dynamic that these brands are in and these marketers are in. One of the things that I want to shift to one part of this customer journey, because one of the things that's been happening at the early stage and even impacting the later stages of this, let's call it the customer funnel or customer journey, this experience that individuals have with brands, is the deprecation of the third-party cookie, the mobile ad ID, and even increasingly visibility into the interactions that individuals have with things like email, where the old way that you might measure email engagement is getting obfuscated. And all of these things and terms just relate to a thing that's happening a level above, which is that consumer privacy and consumer choice and consumer consent is something that's becoming paramount for the consumer, and therefore supported by technology companies that serve the consumer, and therefore supported by governments that regulate. So the dynamic is changing. So the reason I bring that up, Joe, and then we can get into the question, is those things were really important tools in this data management and the way that I would ask and answer questions about the customer before they had given me any consent-based information like their email address to contact them. And now, at least we're hearing from companies we talk to, they're starting to see those signals erode, and they're having to think about what their strategy should be. Or are you hearing this from brands, and how are people managing it?
Yeah, it's a pervasive concern and area of attention in the marketing industry right now. It's pretty unavoidable. Right? You really can't throw a rock without hitting something talking about data deprecation. And you're referring to a very broad phenomenon when we talk about data deprecation. At Forrester, it's a huge topic, and in our parlance, we look at it as you sort of mentioned, this confluence of simultaneously occurring factors where consumer behavior changes. Technology companies are changing, maybe some of their downstream technology, like operating systems and browsers, the evolving privacy and regulatory environment, and of course the persistence of some of these walled garden ecosystems, especially in media, that are changing the way they collect and make their data available inside and outside of their environments. So you're seeing broad fundamental change happening across multiple dimensions, and at the end of the day, this all has a dramatic impact on the availability of data available, not just to marketers but to companies in general. And what it does is it really challenges marketers' core long-standing assumptions for how the discipline operates. So I think acknowledge that data deprecation is a major issue, and it affects everybody in numerous ways. And what we're seeing is, out of the gate, the largest initial area of concern, of course, is in the digital advertising world, right? Because it's been so heavily based on a foundation of third-party cookies historically. And subsequently, we see a lot of activity around concern about how that's going to be measured in the near term, because that, of course, extremely important. And if you do not have the kind of interoperability that we're used to, the ability to measure a massive amount of marketing spend gets called into question. So there's been early and persistent concern around that, and rightfully so. Replacing third-party cookie data, and much of that data lost to data deprecation, like mobile ad IDs, as you noted, does require a set of new approaches and new solutions, really rethinking and developing completely new ways of handling this. The one thing we do know is that it really directs our attention to first-party data. Now, I would say first-party data has always been sort of the gold standard in the marketing world, but in a sense, moving forward, it's effectively the only standard in the marketing world. And so I think we have to consider how it's going to play out over time, right? I mean, we're in a sense, like you noted, the earlier stages of this, right? In some ways, it's conceptual right now because not every change in data deprecation has gone permanently into operational place yet, right? So the next year or so, in a way, is probably somewhat steady state, right? While companies figure out next steps and we await some of the final technical changes in the marketplace. And that's deceptive, right? Because if you're thinking about, maybe we don't have to do anything until the actual changes happen, you couldn't be more wrong. The best advice I can give anybody right now is to start doing the assessment around what changes in things like mobile IDs and third-party cookies are going to do to the way you operate today. And not just ads or measurement, but what data do you collect about customers? What do you share out? How do you work with your partners? Of course, things like measurement and campaign execution. How are you going to personalize on a site? As all those things change, it creates exposure for brands. And we can right now start assessing that much, right? And then you can start again prioritizing. How are you going to start solving and making adjustments for that so there isn't a huge gap when some of these things finally do start falling into place? So again, a lot of that initial concern is around paid media, understandably so. It's such a big slug of how marketing works today and where the spend is. But so much attention now being foisted on first and zero and second party data, first party's close cousins, right? These are going to be sort of the key data elements that at least partially backfill the data we're losing the data deprecation. And in the long term, right, we're going to have to find this essentially this patchwork of replacement data to the best of our ability. I think marketing in general, because of this, because there isn't a perfect replacement for the loss of third-party data, the long-term implication is that you're going to see this bifurcation in marketing, right, based on consent and relationships. And realistically, I think it's safe to assume the large majority of customers are going to be anonymous, and contextual marketing is going to be really, really a crucial part of the marketer's toolbox, and a relatively small percentage of consented known customers are going to be a part of the engagement profile. And again, this goes back to rethinking customer engagement strategy, right? Not only how do you want to engage, what do you want to know about them, but in the real world, if we're going to a data deprecated environment, how does that affect that, right? So doing the inventory on what first party data access do you have today, right? How could you rethink customer engagement strategy to establish really a mutual exchange of value with customers that encourages the initial and ongoing exchange of not only value, but data with a customer where they see the value as much as you do as the brand, so that you can persist that data capability, grow it even, and maintain it. And then I would say, of course, CDPs operate as a part of this potential solution, right? Because they're fundamentally designed to handle first-party data. So certainly, as the emphasis on first-party data, managing it over the long term grows, CDPs are going to be a part of that toolbox too.
It's interesting as you talk through this. I remember reading about data deprecation, and I have this a similar image in my mind of the picture of this rebuilding the airplane. Okay, so I have, in this one I've got sort of things on two sides. One, I have today's world of data understanding and how I'm operating my business, measuring attribution with all the tools that exist today, even though I know they're eroding. And then I have the future, which is a pretty big question mark, but it sounds like in the future I should think I've got, however long it takes, I've got two things. I've got truly anonymous customers where I have to think about that as a media strategy. And then increasingly I have consented customers, which is a smaller percentage of the individuals that I'm reaching, but I want to encourage more people to get into that consented relationship because it allows me to be more effective at targeting. And I'm reminded of what you talked about earlier in terms of the rebuilding the airplane while it's flying. This airplane's there's a lot of marketing spend in this airplane that's going across this path. And so same advice, though, it sounds like. Step back, strategic assessment first of what you want to go in and do. You know that first party data will become more important, but it's never going to replace everything you're doing.
Yep. Part of it is just changing habits, right? A lot of us in this business have grown up for the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is, operating in a very specific way. And we're used to kind of a people-based approach to marketing. So we have to change some of our underlying assumptions that is not always going to be true at the scale we're used to. So there's a mind shift here. And then again, because of we have research at Forrester with consumers that show there's a significant delta in the value that consumers perceive in sharing data and what brands perceive, right? And that shows you that brands historically are not showing consumers the value, right? They are marketing to persuade people to buy the next widget, which certainly has been productive and profitable, I assume. But in this new world, we need to provide value and mutual value with the consumer and transparency. And so that requires a change in the strategy. So if you can understand what your exposure is and what your consumers perceive in terms of value, you can adjust the strategy. And again, that lets you back into how do we generate data? What data do we need? Where does that data land? How's it going to be permissioned? So again, it's not a fishing expedition. You're not just throwing data in some warehouse somewhere hoping it works out later. You're being very prescriptive and specific about we need X, Y, and Z types of data at this point in the customer life cycle. Our customers are on board with that. Here's how we're going to collect them.
So interestingly enough, if today as a brand leader, I started to think about transaction as the real place that I'm converting and getting that kind of consent-based relationship. And there's a big set of investments I make to get consumers to feel great about transacting with me. It may be similarly, I have to start to think about consent as that kind of event where it's not really a product, but I'm creating a product or a set of value for the customer, which starts to feel more mutually beneficial. I, the consumer, think, oh, when I engage with the brand and provide this kind of information, I'm getting some benefit associated with that makes that feel like a worthwhile transaction for me.
Yeah, and I think the good news to a lot of this is that the way consumers are being either retrained or relearning how to engage with brands happens to be moving in this direction also, right? And you can think about it in Chris's life or Joe's life. I mean, consumers have been much more willing to experiment the last few years in terms of how they buy and consume products and engage with brands, right? You think about like Netflix, right? It's kind of the classic example. We retrained, the whole world to not go to a video store to get a tape, but rather to get it by mail, and of course on demand video, right? And we pay for it however many dollars per month. And that has there's so many services like that now. So many products essentially become monthly services. So we get retrained to do things like, instead of paying in advance for something that I own, I'm paying over time or on a monthly basis for something as I use it, right? And so that behavior is certainly being retrained. And what that does is it reshifts really the marketing view of that customer life cycle, not only acquisition of customers, but it really becomes a loyalty play, right, in marketing, where they're constantly showing the value of your service. Because if I don't like it, I can turn it off next month and not give you my money. But it also puts a huge amount of emphasis on product, right, and the offering as this engine of growth. Now, as consumers come around to this, right, you're essentially priming yourself to have a huge number of relevant opportunities to interact with the customer, right? And then it becomes a matter of how do you do that? How do you show that value? If you are, then you've got a platform by which to exchange information and create continuous value, as opposed to I'm going to sell you something once and then I'm going to come back to you in 3 years when it's time to replace it. Now we basically have a built-in excuse to interact with our customers once a month, twice a month, as we provide these services on an ongoing basis.
That's a very interesting way to think about it. So just to take a step back, today maybe in my world along the customer funnel, I have a bunch of things that are happening where I'm personalizing using the third-party cookie, the mobile ad ID, et cetera. And then there's some program the customer signs up for called the loyalty program at the other end, where they express an interest and they become a member. And in my new data map and my new map of this, these start to blur. There's a set of things that I'm going to want to do that's around my first party data, developing a relationship with you. Those I'm going to want to continue to do throughout, and not wait for you to join the loyalty program for me to start to build loyalty with you. And so the need to personalize based on our engagement throughout your life cycle, not just at the beginning. It's almost, I'm seeing this overlap of things I might have thought about as traditional marketing before purchase that I don't do after start to become relevant throughout my purchase history. And things that I might have only done in the context of a loyalty program start to become relevant even for people who aren't in the loyalty program, and we're going to start to see a blur. Does that feel right to you?
Everything becomes, marketing swallows everything. I mean, think about the future probably of transactional messages in this environment, right? I mean, how many times have you bought something and they send you the receipt by email, and it's literally just the receipt. It's just, hey, Chris, thanks for paying $7.99 for another month of our service. See you next month, right? There's no excuse for that in this environment. Like, that's a perfect wasted opportunity to engage with you, right? Because the receipt is merely in a sense, the impetus for creating the communication and the permission to do so. But it's an amazing opportunity to start having an ongoing conversation, Chris, right? It's not just about telling you spent $7.99, right? That's the least of it. And so transactional messaging, loyalty messaging, all these things essentially start to converge, and every opportunity is too important to waste.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because, again, if I sort of think about my experience talking to these brands, it's sort of like marketing owns marketing, but only on a set of touch points. And then at some point when the customer becomes known, marketing doesn't seem to be as engaged in that. I always think about customer support. You thought about transaction, but customer support's a marketing opportunity. It's the way I experience a brand through engaging with something that happened. And it's not always negative. Maybe my size was wrong or things like that. And again, this experience that you've had around the receipt, that same experience happens at customer support, which could be a different kind of engagement channel. So it sounds like what you're saying is marketing should be thinking about all the interaction points a brand has with customer, not only the ones that have sort of traditionally been marketing, as they think about their marketing programs.
Yeah, well, and this varies by industry and company for sure. There are a lot of marketing organizations that are very acquisition centric. And you're right, are not involved. Post onboarding, you don't see a whole lot of marketing anymore, which again is sort of a travesty and going to be a huge business miss, right, in this new environment. Increasingly, the remit of marketing is expanding. We see that especially in large organizations where increasingly CMOs have, if not influence, then more responsibility for broader customer experience. I think the convergence has been accelerated by the pandemic over the last, I guess, 2.5 years now, where certainly you saw a significant crossover between marketing and commerce, right, as sort of that gateway to marketing and CX starting to come together in an actual practical way after talking about it broadly for so many years. So I also have always believed that marketing, there isn't an organization in the company that understands customers as well as marketing does. And is as strong at creating relevant experiences. I think marketing, even if it isn't specifically responsible for every single literal experience, has a lot to offer the rest of the organization in terms of its expertise and knowledge to influence, again, that exchange of value with a customer.
As you talk about this, I'm getting pretty inspired. I think there might be people in marketing who are looking at what's happening around data deprecation and thinking, what am I going to do now? And what you're really saying is there's a whole unlock of new possibilities for the incredible skill set that marketers have
Yeah.
in this new world. And out of this, marketing could be transformed to be much more impactful across the brands.
And it's okay to be nervous. I mean, we're talking about big changes to established businesses. A lot of our existing incentives, especially around how ads are bought and sold, do not align with the new world order as it's going to turn out, right? And that financially impacts, employment-wise, potentially impacts a lot of people, right? So I think it's okay to be aware of it and maybe even concerned initially, but it creates a lot of opportunity as well, right? And look, marketing has always been disrupted. This is not new for marketers.
Yeah.
And if you look at it as an opportunity, I think the companies that figure this out and pay attention to it sooner rather than later do have an opportunity to create sustainable competitive advantages for themselves, at least in their industries. When other companies are probably going to say, look, we're going to take a wait and see attitude towards this. Maybe it won't ever happen. Like I'm here to tell you, it is going to happen, right? Yeah. So waiting only hurts. So the companies that take this very seriously are going to put themselves potentially in a very good position.
Interesting. We've talked about sort of these three topics: this customer journey or customer funnel through the life cycle, data deprecation, and really the implications in terms of the evolution of marketing as we've described, and as you've described. Talk to me a little bit about customer data platforms and how you guide brands through this process. There are so many different customer data platforms out there. They represent such a wide range of capability. How do you help me make sense of it all and brands make sense of it all?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, interest and even excitement about customer data platforms, probably rightfully so, in a world where data becomes so important and has so much unleveraged potential, right? The idea of a CDP is intellectually extremely satisfying, right? For everybody, even analysts, right? It's an amazing idea. I would buy two if I could, right? It's an amazing idea. The way I tell people to think about it is, essentially, how would you select a CDP? So, imagine that, look, it's not that tough to get somebody bought into the high level concept of the CDP, because who doesn't want more, better, faster data, right? That sounds amazing. That's going to be key to executing whatever our strategy is. We need that underlying foundation, right? So in terms of selection, what I tell people is, number one, think of it in terms of deploying what I would call it as a CDP with purpose. Literally the most practical advice I give, and I oftentimes sound like just a broken record on this, is look, always focus on the use cases or the applications of the data, right? What do you need from a CDP as a buyer? What insights do you want about your customers? How and where do you want to engage with them? Because look, there's a lot of companies in the CDP market. It is a category that is in many ways still developing and maturing. So it is many splendid, right? And in some ways that's really good because buyer needs are also very diverse, right? So the odds that you can find a CDP that meets your needs, probably pretty high, and that's fantastic. But it can be overwhelming because there's so many companies talking about CDP from slightly different perspectives. How do you marry that up with what you want? Well, you can't assume that this is a monolithic category. So buyers really have to take control of the process, and they do that by understanding and maintaining really just a laser focus on what their needs are. I've even had to tell people, don't even call it a CDP. Ignore the CDP moniker, right? Just think about, here's what I need from you. Can you do that, right? You just have to be really vicious about maintaining a focus on your own needs as a buyer to get to the end of this. And we try to help people through that every day at Forrester. Beyond that, right, assuming you find here, based on my needs, is a selection or a CDP that really does what we need. How much further do you take that? I'm one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is usability, right? The general theory that CDP should be available for the business user, right? In a more packaged type of solution. That puts a lot of pressure on user experience, and it's something that oftentimes buyers pay attention to far too late in the process, right? Because we're really kind of rightfully so focused on the data side, right? But how are you going to use this tool called a CDP? So the role-based usage, how you administrate it, the workflows, the features, is the UI effectively designed so that your users on a day-to-day basis are going to be able be productive in this system for the next possibly few years. I'm a fan kind of the proof of concept with a little bit of data, just to get everybody on hands-on keyboard, trying out and making sure this iteration, right, of a CDP really meets your needs, right? Even if on paper, right, it has all the features and functionality and great things about it. And then finally, I think one of the big differentiating factors with CDPs is going beyond the technology. If you think about what a CDP offers, you're putting, as a buyer, a huge amount of trust in a customer data platform, right? You are forking over some of the most valuable capabilities that you own as a company, your first-party customer data. There's almost nothing more valuable right now than that, and you're sending that over to some other provider on the promise that they're going to help you manage it and use it. And that value proposition is fantastic, but it is a highly trusted relationship, right? And to do that, you need a vendor that is mature enough, trustworthy, well-funded, well-run company, so that they can do that for you today and in the future. You need things like real professional services. Maybe you want real customer support, customer success management, right? Do they have the literal ability to go beyond just throwing some technology over the wall to you, right, that you will pay for and give them money in exchange for, to deliver and maintain and help you use that technology? Because standing up basic technology and saying it's a product is pretty easy. And that's part of what we see in this very broad market, right? The minimum lowest criteria to be a CDP is a real lowest common denominator. So having support around it, having a great product development team, right? These are really the hallmarks of a well-run, well-resourced, mature provider that you can count on today and tomorrow. So you got to understand the services and support capabilities, the underlying tech. I'm also, just finally, a big fan of looking at the product roadmap, going to the product team before I buy something and saying, show me the next 2 years of product development, and understanding, one, are they sophisticated and mature enough to have a real product organization, real product managers, real leadership in the technology, right, where they're planning and building and being mature about that, but also ensuring not only will this product maybe meet my needs out of the gate today, but over the next few years, right? Because we don't want to have to re-platform later if our needs diverge. What you don't want to happen is buy a tool now and then find out in 18 months that your CDP has different plans than you do for your customer engagement. We want someone that's going to be a great provider for us now and in the foreseeable future. And I understand, of course, that a roadmap is a living document and it changes and evolves, and that's totally fine. But I think it's 100% fair to ask a provider to show a multi-year roadmap, their tenets of design, and their core priorities, so that you can make sure that fits your vision for customer engagement.
Joe, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think right now what we'll probably do is take a couple questions from the audience, and then we'll move to wrap. And so let me just go quickly and look into the chat and see if there are any that have come in. Oh, here's one for you, Joe, and actually it relates to what you were just talking about. Seems like there's a lot of press lately about brands being unhappy with the customer data solutions they've chosen. What do you think they're doing wrong?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think, the way I would start out is, to be fair, I think marketers are playing the cards they've been dealt, as are providers. We've been talking this entire session around, this is a very complex environment everybody's operating in, buyers, consumers, and vendors alike. That's been in constant flux, right? So I prefer to believe that everybody's coming at this with good intentions and trying to keep up, and everybody's in essentially the same position there. So, I think it's more likely that selected solutions, it's not that they have failed or even been subpar, it's that I think a lot of times this is saying that they just don't age as well as we would like, because the environment is changing so quickly. Even systems, I've had this with my clients where they put new systems in place even just a couple of years ago, and they're on the verge of being rendered obsolete today, right? And that is the exogenous market affecting a vendor and a buyer or a marketing organization, not necessarily the failure of a solution or a technology or a poor purchasing decision. Now, we can't stop the world from changing. I'm not sure we want to, but we can take steps to mitigate this risk. And it kind of goes back to the way we're talking about working with the right provider that you trust today and tomorrow. And again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the cardinal sin is always going to be failing to focus on the use cases. And there's a couple dimensions to that. One, thinking too much about, I need this purist view of like a CDP or some other category. It's like you just really need a tool that's going to help you deliver on your use cases, no matter what it's called, honestly. And the worst thing you can do is just buy a CDP, and we kind of talked about the fishing expedition, buy a CDP, lob all the data into it, and hope you're going to sort it out later. That's not a data management strategy. That's an abdication of responsibility. That's the second dimension, as I implied earlier, was designing for the future, right? Not just thinking about today's use cases, but really kind of having a roadmap developed of your requirements and use cases for the future, because one of the value propositions of a CDP is the agility to develop it and manage it over time pretty efficiently, without having to re-platform or use massive amounts of internal resources. And so it should grow as an asset, as a capability that's used more broadly over time. So you have to design for the future as well. Beyond that, I think people shoot themselves in the foot when they don't think about how a CDP or any other technology affects their marketing workflows and processes. Like if you think you're just going to drop a CDP into the middle of your marketing processes and it's going to fix things, that's not going to happen, right? This is classic change management. So many firms don't think until it's way too late about, because they over-index on buying the right CDP, which is important, but you have to think about, where are we gaining efficiency? How does this affect our campaign workflows? Which users on our side does this affect? And you have to map out how the CDP is going to integrate into your current processes and marketing capabilities. And you have to know that. If you can't do that, right, it's going to end up adding more work and time, and in fact becoming maybe an obstacle, right? Even if the data is sitting there waiting to be used just the way you wanted it. So this is a workflow and process issue as much as it is a data and technology issue. And then finally, remember that nothing lives in a bubble. Consider fit in terms of how the CDP operates in the context of your existing technology stack, right? The CDP doesn't stand alone. In fact, more than almost anything else, the CDP integrates with so many data sources and systems of egress, the endpoints around engagement or analysis work. So the CDP is not an independent standalone tool. It's critical to understand how it's going to affect kind of usage and data flows and performance and security needs and all those integrations that you need to really bring that data to life. So think about it as a part of your stack from day one, and how it's going to live and coexist and enhance the tools that you already have.
Joe, that's fantastic. I think at this point we're going to have to wrap. I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today to talk through this complex issue and the advice you've given. I thought, just for my own benefit, I might wrap up the four things that we've talked about and sort of summarize. One, really for brands, this notion of this customer journey from first touch to the end is something to really think about. You're rebuilding the airplane while you're flying it. Some advice to think about is really understanding at each place what data you need, what tools you need, what questions you want to ask and answer, and how do you do that in a way that's really targeted that you can then evolve from. Two, data deprecation is coming. And while it won't be here today, you should have a plan for what's going to happen. And really that plan involves a shift towards more and more engagements that happen with first-party data and products you need to build to help brands engage with customers engage with you, but also a lot of anonymous and sort of one-to-many kinds of engagements to bring customers in. And so again, that's the same building the airplane while you're flying it challenge. The third I wrote down is the expansion of marketing through this. While some things will be different, but marketing can be expansive in thinking through how to go from just loyalty and just acquiring to a comprehensive and orchestrated set of actions and activities. And then last, as you're evaluating CDPs, be thoughtful, be clear about your requirements, understand what you're trying to do, and then make sure that you've got everything you need in that, including the product, the roadmap, the professional services, and the experience in order to get you to value.
That sounds great. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work to do. Sounds great.
A ton of work. Well, Joe, as always, I've really enjoyed our conversation. So appreciate you taking the time with us. And I'll look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.